I caught my boss cheating his wife, but karma hit harder than I ever expected. I never thought I'd end up in a situation like this. Honestly, I'm not the kind of person who snoops around or digs into other people's business. I usually keep my head down, do my job, and clock out. But sometimes life throws you into the middle of something you never asked for, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's what happened to me one Thursday night when I stayed late at the office. I work for a mid-sized logistics company in the city. Nothing glamorous, but steady enough to pay my rent. My boss, Mark, is one of those men who looks like he has everything together. Sharp suits, expensive watch, the kind of confidence that makes people laugh at jokes that aren't even funny. He also has a wife who occasionally drops by with their 2 kids, always smiling, always looking picture perfect. I used to think they were the model family. But that night changed everything. The office was quiet, the kind of silence you only hear when all the phones have stopped ringing and the hum of people typing has died down. I was buried in spreadsheets, trying to meet a deadline that Mark himself had set, when I heard voices down the hall. At first, I assumed it was the cleaning crew, but the tone was different. Hushed, hurried, with a nervous laugh threaded through. Something about it made me pause. The blinds in the hallway were half drawn, casting long stripes of fluorescent light against the carpet, and curiosity pulled me from my desk before I even realized what I was doing. I crept closer, notebook still in my hand, telling myself I'd just ask if they needed anything. But when I turned the corner, I froze. There was Mark, my boss, the same man who boasted about his family at company parties, pressed up against one of the junior associates, Claire. She's younger than me, maybe mid-20s, with bright blonde hair and the kind of energy that always fills a room. Except right then, she wasn't laughing. She looked nervous, almost guilty, as Mark whispered something in her ear and kissed her like he owned her. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like the ground had disappeared under me. I ducked back before they could see me, heart pounding so loud I was sure it echoed in the empty corridor. I didn't want to be there, didn't want to witness it, but it was too late. I had seen enough to know exactly what was happening. My hands shook as I gripped my notebook, fighting the urge to storm in and say something, anything. But I didn't. Instead, I stumbled back to my desk, trying to process what the hell I had just walked into. For the next half hour, I sat staring at my computer screen without seeing a single number. My brain was buzzing. Part of me wanted to pretend it hadn't happened, to bury it under work and walk out like nothing was wrong. But another part of me felt sick. Sick for his wife, who I'd chatted with just a week ago when she brought the kids by, sick for myself because now I was carrying a secret I never asked for, and sick for Claire, who clearly looked conflicted even if she went along with it. Every tick of the clock felt heavier, like I was counting down to some inevitable fallout. And yet, I stayed silent. I told myself maybe it was just a mistake, maybe it wouldn't happen again, maybe it wasn't my business. But deep down, I knew better. This was more than a mistake. This was a choice. And the weight of it pressed on me like a stone in my chest. I left the office that night with a knot in my stomach, the city lights blurring as I drove home. The whole way, I kept replaying what I'd seen, the way Mark's hand had lingered on Claire's waist, the way she'd glanced nervously toward the door, like she knew it was wrong. By the time I crawled into bed, I was exhausted, but sleep didn't come easy. My mind was split in two, one side screaming at me to stay out of it, the other whispering that I couldn't ignore this forever. I thought about his wife's smile, about the kids who drew pictures on the office whiteboard when they visited, and I felt like I was holding a live wire that could burn me no matter what I did. Little did I know, the decision would be ripped out of my hands sooner than I expected, because karma doesn't wait for you to act. It finds its own way of settling scores, and when it came, it hit harder than I ever could have imagined. The next morning, the office felt different to me, even though on the surface, nothing had changed. People still shuffled in with coffee cups in hand, printers whirred, phones rang, and Mark strolled through the place like he owned not just the company, but the air we breathed. Only now, every time I looked at him, I couldn't unsee what I'd witnessed. The casual way he clapped someone on the back, the fake smile he gave in meetings, the way he joked about his amazing wife, it all made me want to laugh and throw up at the same time. And Claire? She sat 3 rows away from me, her hair perfectly curled, her eyes glued to her computer screen, pretending like nothing happened. But I saw the slight shake in her hands when she picked up her coffee. I saw how she avoided eye contact whenever Mark passed by. It was like the two of them had written a secret script only they could read, while the rest of us played along, clueless extras in their drama. Only I wasn't clueless anymore, and the weight of that knowledge made every breath feel heavier. For the next week, I debated with myself endlessly. Should I tell someone? Should I confront Mark? Should I pull Claire aside and ask her what the hell she was thinking? Every option felt like walking into a fire. If I told HR, they might brush it off. Mark had power, connections, the kind of charisma that people bend rules for. If I confronted him, I'd be painting a target on my own back. I'd seen how he dealt with people who crossed him. Sudden layoffs, projects reassigned, subtle digs in meetings that made careers quietly crumble. And if I approached Claire, I risked humiliating her or getting tangled in something messier than I could handle. So I kept my mouth shut, forcing myself to act normal while the truth burned in my chest like a secret brand. But karma has this strange way of working itself into the cracks you try to cover. It started small. One morning, as I walked past Mark's office, I caught a sharp edge in his voice. He was on the phone, trying to keep it low, but the walls in that building were thinner than he realized. "You can't just call me here," he snapped. "I told you to wait." His door was half closed, and I saw him pacing, running a hand through his hair. For the first time, he didn't look like the confident, polished man I'd always known. He looked rattled, cornered. Later that day, I noticed Claire leave early, her face pale, her eyes red like she'd been crying in the bathroom. My stomach twisted, but I said nothing. The real blow came a few days later. Mark's wife showed up at the office unannounced, the kids in tow. She carried a basket of cupcakes, some school fundraiser, I think, and her smile lit up the whole lobby. She stopped to talk with the receptionist, then waved to a few of us as she made her way back to Mark's office. I swear I felt the air tighten. Claire had just walked past me on her way to grab something from the supply room, and when she spotted Mark's wife, her entire body stiffened like a deer in headlights. She ducked quickly around the corner, her face flushed. And me? I sat frozen, watching Mark's perfect little world overlap with the secret one I'd stumbled onto. The contrast was almost unbearable. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove home, dropped my bag by the door, and paced my apartment like a caged animal. My conscience screamed at me. I kept picturing his wife's face, the way she looked at him with such trust, the way the kids clung to his arm like he was their hero. And behind it all, I saw him, kissing Claire in the shadows of the office, treating loyalty and love like disposable props in his performance. I knew the longer I stayed silent, the more complicit I became. But every time I thought about blowing the whistle, I pictured Mark's cold smile turning on me, dismantling my career piece by piece. He had power, and I was just me. Replaceable. Forgettable. What I didn't know then, what none of us knew, was that Mark's carefully balanced act was already starting to crack on its own. I wouldn't have to choose whether to expose him, because fate had already made the decision. And when the truth finally tore its way into the light, it did so with a force that left no one untouched, least of all me. It was a Tuesday when everything started unraveling. I came into work groggy, clutching my coffee, expecting another dull day of reports and endless emails. Instead, I walked straight into chaos. People were whispering in clusters near the elevators, eyes darting toward Mark's office. The blinds were drawn shut, which was unusual. Mark liked to keep them open, almost like he wanted everyone to see his kingdom. I slid into my seat, pretending to work while my ears strained to catch bits of conversation floating around. Someone said, "arguing." Another said, "she's here again." And then I realized his wife was in there. She'd shown up unannounced again, but this time it wasn't for cupcakes or smiles. The muffled sound of raised voices seeped through the thin walls. At first, I tried to block it out, but then a word punched through the air, loud and sharp: cheating. My hands froze over my keyboard. My chest went tight. She knew. Somehow, she knew. I glanced around and saw my coworkers exchanging wide-eyed looks, pretending not to listen but obviously doing exactly what I was doing, hanging on to every sound. Mark's voice was low, defensive, but his wife's was fire. She demanded answers, accused, her voice breaking in ways that made my stomach ache. And then came the name. Claire's name. Clear as day. The room went so silent you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above us. Claire wasn't at her desk. She hadn't come in yet. By the time she walked through the door 15 minutes later, the atmosphere was radioactive. Heads turned, whispers shot like arrows. She hadn't heard. Not yet. She walked in smiling politely, holding a latte, her blonde hair swinging over her shoulder, completely unaware that her world was seconds away from collapsing. I wanted to warn her, to pull her aside and tell her not to go near his office, but before I could even stand, the door slammed open. Mark's wife stormed out, her face streaked with tears, clutching her purse like it was armor. She brushed past Claire without a word, but her eyes, God, her eyes said everything. They were daggers, pure betrayal burning through them. Claire froze mid-step, her cup slipping from her hands and splattering coffee all over the carpet. Nobody moved to help her. We all just watched, paralyzed, as the storm raged right there in the middle of the office. Mark followed seconds later, his tie loosened, his face pale. He barked something about everyone getting back to work, but his voice cracked and no one listened. Claire stumbled after him, whispering his name, but he shoved her off with a look so cold it made my blood run colder than any winter. Right then, I saw it, the shift. The same man who had kissed her in the hallway now treated her like she was nothing more than a liability. Disposable. My heart twisted for her, even though part of me was angry. She'd been involved in the first place. She looked lost, like the ground had opened under her feet. The rest of the day was a blur of speculation. HR was called in, and though the details were kept confidential, everyone knew. In an office, secrets don't survive. They fester, they leak, they spread like wildfire. Claire left early, eyes red and swollen, her things clutched to her chest like she expected to never return. Mark, on the other hand, retreated into his office and shut the door. For hours, he didn't come out, didn't take calls, didn't answer emails. The man who once strutted through the place like a king now looked like a prisoner in his own castle. And for the first time, I felt a strange shift inside me. Not relief, not satisfaction, but something darker. I realized karma had begun its work, and it wasn't going to stop with a few whispers in the hallway. That night, I couldn't shake the images from my head. The wife's tear-streaked face, Claire's trembling hands, Mark's hollow stare. It played over and over like a film I couldn't pause. Part of me still wondered if I should have spoken up earlier, if I could have prevented that ugly scene. But another part of me knew the truth. It was always going to end like this. People like Mark think they can juggle lies forever, but lies are heavy, and eventually they crush the liar from the inside. What I didn't realize, though, was that the crushing hadn't even truly begun yet. This was only the first crack. The real collapse, the kind that would take him down completely, was still waiting just around the corner. The fallout was faster and more brutal than anyone expected. By Wednesday morning, the entire company was buzzing like a hive after someone kicked it. Rumors weren't whispers anymore. They were headlines, shouted in the break room, hissed over cubicle walls, dropped into Slack threads like grenades. HR tried to contain it, sending out one of those bland all-staff emails reminding everyone to be respectful and not spread unverified claims. But it was too late. People had seen the fight, they'd heard the shouting, and Mark's reputation as the untouchable golden boy was gone. Around 10 a.m., I got called into a meeting with my manager. My stomach clenched, wondering if somehow I was in trouble, if maybe Mark suspected I'd known something. But no, they just wanted updates on a project. Still, as I sat across from my manager, I noticed how distracted she looked, how her eyes kept flicking toward the glass window of her office that had a clear line of sight to Mark's door. Everyone was waiting for the next explosion. And it didn't take long. At noon, a group of us were eating lunch when the sound of raised voices erupted again. This time, it wasn't Mark's wife. It was Claire. She'd stormed back in, red-eyed and shaking, demanding he talk to her. I couldn't hear every word, but the tone was unmistakable. Desperation, betrayal, anger. She accused him of promising things, of leading her on, of throwing her under the bus. He tried to hush her, his voice low and menacing, but she was past the point of caring. She shouted about how he had begged her to keep it a secret, how he'd sworn he loved her, how she'd risked her career for him. Every syllable carried through the office like a broadcast, and every head turned. There was no hiding it anymore. By the time security was called to escort her out, Claire was sobbing, her words broken but loud enough to echo in my ears. I gave you everything, and you ruined me. The silence afterward was suffocating. Nobody could meet each other's eyes. Mark's door slammed, but that sound didn't erase what we'd all heard. In that moment, the king was naked, exposed for what he really was, a liar, a manipulator, a coward. Later that week, the bigger consequences started rolling in. Apparently, word had reached corporate, not just about the affair, but about the toxic culture Mark had fostered. Someone, maybe Claire, maybe his wife, maybe both, had filed a formal complaint, complete with evidence. Screenshots of messages, late-night emails, even pictures. HR couldn't bury that kind of proof. Within days, Mark was suspended, pending investigation. The office felt like it was holding its breath, waiting to see if the guillotine would fall. I'll never forget the day he came in to collect his things. He wasn't wearing his crisp suit. He looked smaller, his shirt untucked, his hair messy, his eyes ringed with dark circles. The swagger was gone. He carried a cardboard box like any other disgraced employee, piling in his awards, his family photos, that stupid gold pen he always bragged about. Nobody said a word. People just watched, the way you watch a storm finally break apart after it's wrecked everything. I thought he might at least try to make a speech, throw some blame, maybe even lash out. But no, he just walked out, head down, shoulders hunched, a ghost of the man who once strutted through those halls. And yet, even as I watched him go, a strange unease lingered in me. Karma had struck, yes, but it wasn't clean. It wasn't satisfying. Claire was gone too, her career shattered before it even had the chance to bloom. His wife? I couldn't even imagine the pain she must have been in, trying to rebuild her life while raising 2 kids. And me? I was left with the bitter knowledge that sometimes the truth doesn't set anyone free. Sometimes it just scorches everything in its path, leaving ashes where trust used to be. After Mark walked out with that cardboard box, you'd think things would calm down. In some ways they did. The office slowly went back to normal rhythms, the hum of printers, the shuffle of papers, the occasional laugh from the break room. But under the surface, it wasn't the same. It was like a house that had survived a fire. The walls were still standing, but the smell of smoke lingered in every room. People couldn't stop talking about it. Some were gleeful, almost smug, as if watching the mighty fall gave them a twisted sense of justice. Others were unsettled, quieter, maybe because they realized how fragile reputations and careers could really be. I hovered somewhere in between. Part of me relieved he was gone, another part weighed down by the wreckage left behind. Weeks passed, and whispers about Mark's personal life started circulating. His wife had filed for divorce almost immediately. She'd apparently uncovered not just the affair with Claire, but several others stretching back years. He wasn't just a cheater. He was a serial one, leaving a trail of betrayal behind him like breadcrumbs. The divorce filings became public record, and somehow copies found their way into the office. People devoured them like gossip magazines, shaking their heads at the details, the late-night hotel charges, the secret credit card, the lies piled on top of lies. The more I read, the more I realized how little I'd actually known about the man I worked under for years. He wasn't just arrogant, he was hollow, building his empire on deceit. And then came the biggest blow. One morning, I scrolled through the local news on my phone and nearly dropped it when I saw his name in the headline. Fraud investigation. Apparently, while everyone was distracted by his affairs, Mark had been cooking the books, shifting numbers, siphoning money through shady side accounts. The company had been bleeding funds, And now the authorities were involved. It was surreal, seeing his smirking face plastered on the evening news, not as the golden boss, but as a disgraced fraudster. My coworkers and I watched the broadcast in stunned silence from the break room, the anchor's words sinking in like stones: possible jail time, financial ruin, lawsuits from investors. Karma hadn't just knocked on his door. It had kicked it down and set the whole place on fire. I sat there afterward, staring at the blank TV screen, my coffee cooling in my hand. My mind drifted back to that first night when I stumbled on him kissing Claire in the hallway. I remembered the sick feeling in my gut, the way I told myself it wasn't my business, that staying silent was safer. And maybe it was. If I'd spoken up then, I would have been dragged into the mess, maybe even destroyed with it. Instead, I just watched from the sidelines as Karma did what I couldn't: dismantle him piece by piece until there was nothing left. But the strange thing was, it didn't feel like victory. It felt haunting. Because here's the truth nobody tells you about watching Karma in action: it's messy. It doesn't strike neatly, punishing only the guilty. It scorches everything around them. Claire lost her job and her reputation. His wife lost her marriage and her trust. His kids lost the father they thought they knew. Even the company lost clients and money, all because of one man's lies. And me? I lost a piece of my own peace of mind. I still lie awake sometimes, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I should have done something sooner. If maybe, just maybe, I could have softened the blow for the innocent ones caught in the crossfire. But then I remind myself of one thing: the universe has its own timing. I didn't expose Mark, but he exposed himself. His arrogance, his greed, his selfishness, it was always going to catch up with him. I just happened to be there to witness the beginning of the end. And maybe that's why I'm writing this now, late at night, to strangers on the internet. Because the image of him, once so untouchable, walking out with a cardboard box and a broken life, is burned into me. It's proof that no matter how high someone builds themselves on lies, the fall will come. And when it does, it won't just hurt them. It'll take down everything they touched. So if there's one thing I learned, it's this: secrets have weight. They don't stay hidden forever. And when they finally surface, the crash is louder than you can ever imagine.